Ryan, what's on your radar?
So we're going to talk later on today's show with the American Prospect's Dave Dayen about the Biden administration's recent capitulation to a lobby group that calls itself the Solar Energy Industries Association, but doesn't like to mention that several of the major companies that make up the coalition are based in Western China or do most of their solar manufacturing there. Now, the short story is Biden just straight up suspending the law for 2 years, the trade law for 2 years. Now, we'll get to that later, but first, I wanted to highlight what can now fairly be called a pattern with the Biden administration. Every chance this White House has been given to choose between American solar manufacturing with American workers on the one side and the Chinese-dominated supplier on the other side, he has sided with the Chinese firms over the American ones. And the current system is set up to push him in that direction. Here's the catch-22. Because there is a close to zero solar manufacturing base in the United States, there's obviously no lobby group to represent them. Without a lobby group, you don't get heard in Washington. What we do have are solar installers, both rooftop and industrial, and they source their solar products from Southeast Asian companies, which in turn source their products from China, particularly Western China, where forced labor is common and where industry is subsidized with cheap coal. I recently interviewed trade policy expert Lori Wallach on my podcast Deconstructed, and she lays out how all this works in much more detail, but suffice it to say, the main question is whether the products are truly coming from Southeast Asia or whether China is just using those countries to circumvent American trade laws. So in this latest fight, the companies benefiting from the circumvention had a huge lobby in Washington, but the public, which wants a future American solar manufacturing base, had no lobby, because that's all still way in the future, so the Chinese companies won. But like I said, that wasn't the first time. So on February 1st, 2022, Biden broke from Trump-era tariffs that had been slapped on what are known as bifacial solar panels. He also increased the duty-free limit for crystalline silicon solar cells from 2.5 gigawatts up to 5, another win for the installation industry as it made Chinese products cheaper. Another case involved a domestic industry group calling itself American Solar Manufacturers Against Chinese Circumvention, or ASMAC, which is a pretty solid acronym. You have to give them that. Now, last August, they petitioned Commerce to launch anti-circumvention inquiries into solar imports from Southeast Asia. The companies filed anonymously, not wanting to draw the wrath of more powerful players in the industry. The SEIA, which is that coalition that includes Chinese companies who are using American companies as cover, they argued to Commerce that the American companies shouldn't be able to stay anonymous. So again, the Biden administration sided against the American solar companies and sided with SEIA there. So only one company refiled and the rest ran away scared. So Biden here is playing short-term politics at a long-term cost, and it's not even clear there will be much short-term upside. Now, the reason so many solar projects are stalled is that China is breaking contracts and selling to Europe instead because Europe is buying every green energy product in sight to counteract their Russian fuel dependence. Now, this executive order won't change that. The best that can be said for it is it might prevent some layoffs in the solar installation industry, which is obviously important. But what it also does is stave off the creation of green energy independence. So I played a portion of this following clip recently, but as a reminder, you know who understands all of this? West Virginia's Joe Manchin. Here he is at Davos.
The North American continent has the ability to be the energy juggernaut of the world. If we have Canada, United States, and Mexico, with the amount of critical minerals that we have deposits in those three countries on one continent, working together seamlessly, we will absolutely reduce our dependency on Asia, on China right now, who does 80% of the processing, has a total control, almost a monopoly, if you will, on the critical elements that we need. We can't move into electric vehicle and being dependent on foreign supply chains.
So we're heading into a world where globalization is being reversed. Things are coming home, are coming back on shore. But China isn't playing fair when it comes to manufacturing, and we have nobody to blame but ourselves. Because America doesn't like to do industrial policy, but it's impossible to compete in a deglobalizing environment without doing industrial policy. Our solar manufacturing industry needs industrial policy behind it to effectively compete, or we can just live at the whim of China. And to me, this is so important because if we're no longer in a globalized world that's kind of run by Wall Street and the Fed, but actually we're pulling things back on shore, then countries have to think through what industries they're bringing back onshore and how they're going to actually kind of support those. For instance, if you're going to do the manufacturing here in the United States, you need a plant, but it's going to take, in order to build $1 billion plant, it's going to take 20 plus years for that to pay off. And there's basically no companies that are going to want to do that. And so what China does and what other countries that have industrial policy do is they say, you know what, the public is going to build this plant. We're going to build it, and here's where we're going to build it because this is the best place to do it. And then we're going to lease it to private companies so that you only have to take a 1-year risk on this thing. But we just aren't set up to do that.
Well, because people can profit when we don't do that. That's exactly the case. And this is like you said here, you cannot compete in a global business environment if you don't have industrial policy. And I think that's what a lot of people on the right missed for so long. Because you know what? We do have an industrial policy right now, and it benefits cronies. Like it's an industrial policy that doesn't benefit American industry.
De-industrial policy.
It's a de-industrial policy, right? And you can't put the globalization genie back in the bottle. And that's exactly why it's important to recognize some organization of the economy is going to happen, because you cannot, without some sense of organization, you cannot compete with the Chinese. And if you want to outsource not just solar technology, but masks, PPE, prescription drugs, if you think that we can have a secure global supply chain in that situation, be my guest, fine. You try to work that out. We've already seen the experiment utterly fail. So the alternative is to figure out how the government can incentivize competition domestically that is in and of itself a competition globally. And so you have to be able to do that. And I think this is such a fantastic and important point because the organization that exists now, which is sometimes defended by free marketers, is crony capitalism.
Right.
That's all it is.
Right, because that's the system that we have. The powerful interests are able to work their way in Washington. And the advantage that China has over us right now is that they can have their central committee sit down and say, you know what, and then they did this 10 or 15 years ago or whatever it was, you know what, clean energy is going to be is the future. We want to dominate that. How are we going to dominate that? Well, we're going to build a bunch of dirty coal plants in Western China. We're going to use a bunch of slave labor to produce the components that are going to then fuel the entire clean, quote, clean energy revolution around the world.
Rare earth minerals?
Rare earth minerals. And if any country tries to build their own manufacturing base around this, we're going to bribe or however we're going to manipulate their so they legally do it in the United States. They can do it extra legally in some other places, and we're going to undercut we're going to dump a whole bunch of cheap stuff on their market, so it puts their companies out of business. And as a last resort, we're just going to stop. We're going to boycott them. And so that's what they're doing in the United States now. It's like, you know what? We're not sending you any of our stuff anymore. So how do you like that? Now all of your plans that you had to build this giant Indiana solar farm, that's on pause, and then you have politicians saying, well, okay, just cave. Yeah. And it might be the short-term thing to do, but long-term, it's in their interest, and then we're just dependent on them.
Well, yeah, if you want to compete with countries that use literal slave labor organized by the government to keep prices low, good luck.
Yeah,
good luck.
You're not going to be able to do that.
Yeah, no, it's just a stupid experiment, and it's wildly unhelpful.
And Dave Dayen's done some great reporting on this for The Prospect. We're going to have him on later to talk a little bit more about this, because this is one of the most important issues of the global economy going forward.
Absolutely, no question about it.
And we'll have more rising up next. Next, we're going to talk to Igor Kotkin about the war in Ukraine. Stick around.